Hello and welcome at Home Morphologists. Today I'm going to look at the different times we see spherocytes on a blood film. And we're going to have a talk about how we can come up with the correct diagnosis when we see spherocytes as our prominent poikilocyte. So the first slide I'm going to look at today is slide 5/3A, which is our hereditary spherocytosis. And one thing that is quite common to disorders with spherocytes is a high MCHC. And so the reference range on this patient was 320 to 350, and we have an MCHC of 360. So often when I see that MCHC at that upper end, sort of above 355 to about 375 grams per litre, I sort of get triggered in that there may be spherocytes there, and I'll be on the lookout for spherocytes. So when I look at this blood film, the first thing that strikes me is the polychromasia. So they're our reticulocytes, and we say they exhibit polychromasia. And these are these larger blue cells here. Now I know you at home are thinking, Rebecca, they are the same color as the other cells, and I promise you they are not. And hopefully by the end of this course you can appreciate that your reticulocytes exhibit polychromasia and they are a slightly blue color. So if I have increased reticulocytes because my normal reticulocyte range is 1 to 4%, then I need to ask myself, why is my body giving me red cells before I need them? What's happening to my red cells? Where are they going? And because of that, I'm going to start looking for some of those clinically significant poikilocytes, such as your spherocytes, schistocytes, bite and blister cells, sickle cells. And so what I'm noticing when I'm looking through here is that I have a presence of spherocytes. So what makes a good spherocyte? A spherocyte should be perfectly round. It should be smaller than the other red blood cells. And it will lack central pallor. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for spherocytes. And when I'm looking at this blood film, it is a little bit blurry. I don't know if that's the VPN or just the slide. But our spherocytes are perfectly round, lack central pallor, and smaller than our other red cells. And that might give the appearance that this is a dimorphic blood film and that there's two populations of cells. But what we really have are the smaller cells, which are the spherocytes, and the larger cells are our polychromatic reticulocytes. And that's what's giving that appearance of that dimorphic population. So sometimes you'll see that as well, and you'll think, oh, maybe there's some spherocytes here. So you see here, perfectly round and lacks central pallor. They're our spherocytes. Now, the reason I know this is hereditary spherocytosis is because of the degree of hemolysis here. So I have a reticulocyte response, but as I'm traveling through, I'm not really seeing that many, if any, nucleated red blood cells. And so it's not an acute hemolysis. It's not that one day I woke up and I started to hemolyze all my red blood cells. This has been going on for a long time. It's slow burning. I can still release and create reticulocytes and polychromatic cells. So I'm destroying my red cells slowly and I'm replacing them slowly. And so that is because in our hereditary spherocytosis, the spleen is going to be removing these cells. And sometimes then we would remove the spleen. And so what we could look for in a patient is the signs that the spleen has been removed. So that's our acanthocytes, our target cells, and our Hal jelly bodies. However, this patient does not have asplenic features. I do not believe their spleen has been removed. Now, another thing that I see, and I see this in my hereditary spherocytosis, is something called mushroom cells. So I want you to have a look at this cell here. Sort of like the bottom of it's like a little mushroom, and then you've got your little mushroom top. It's something that you see in hereditary spherocytosis, and we don't see that in our autoimmune hemolytic anemias as much. So when we have spherocytes and polychromasia and we have mushroom cells, it tends to be more of a hereditary spherocytosis. So we're going to look at this slide, mild hemolysis, spherocytes, polychromasia. There was a slight left shift. We did have a myelocyte on the screen before. It's a metamyelocyte up there. And we're going to compare that to a slide that is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So autoimmune hemolytic anemia is slide 5.4a. 5-4A. Where is it? Come on. Okay. And let's think, what's the first thing we notice about 5-4A? When it loads, what's the first thing we notice? It's just the complete increase in the degree of hemolysis. So in this slide, let me click those polychromatic cells. I'm clicking them everywhere. Those big blue reticulocytes are everywhere. The spherocytes is a lot more marked, the spherocytosis. Small, round, perfectly round. No central pallor. They are all our spherocytes. We have a left shift again. So the degree of hemolysis is a lot higher. I have nucleated red blood cells. I'm starting to see areas where I have some agglutination of my red blood cells as well. And so this is an autoimmune hemolytic anemia. It is much more of a brisk hemolysis. I woke up one day and all of a sudden I had all these spherocytes and I'm pushing out so many reticulocytes and nucleated red blood cells. But again, the spherocytes look pretty much the same, perfectly round, dense color, makes it look like a dimorphic picture, but it really is just spherocytes versus reticulocytes. Pretty much any cell that is not a reticulocyte is a spherocyte. And so eventually those reticulocytes too will become spherocytes as they get coated in complement for immune destruction. We have nucleated red blood cells as well. Probably not as much as I would like in this film, but there are nucleated red blood cells, and it has been reported. Well, it hasn't been reported on the sheet here, but it probably should have been reported. So if I get a slide and my prominent poikilocyte is spherocytes, I'm going to think about hereditary spherocytes versus autoimmune. I'm going to judge that on my degree of hemolysis, the amount of nucleated red blood cells that I see. I might also look at the mushroom cells. I'm not seeing mushroom cells here. They are all round, small spherocytes. There's something else I just wanted to show you. It's to compare that with the slide that is our Burns patient. So it's 5-6B. And Burns, the spherocytes in Burns are referred to as microspherocytes. So they're like tiny little bits of the membrane has budded off in the heat. You get these tiny, tiny little spherocytes, these microspherocytes. And so that is our feature with Burns. Now, of course, good thing about Burns, well, not good, but you tend to know a patient has Burns. So you're not really thinking, does this person have hereditary sphero? You will have the clinical notes there. But what you are looking for are these much smaller microspherocytes in a Burns patient, about a quarter the size of the cell. Some of them can be even a lot smaller, sort of if you look over here. Some very, very small cells. And then you have to remember that some of these may be counted in as platelets when they go through the machine. So your platelet count may be inaccurate because these microspherocytes are now starting to resemble the size of platelets. Now, something that I do see happen often is students get spherocytes and bite and blister cells confused. So I'm just going to spend the last few minutes looking at bite and blister cells and a G6PD deficiency. Okay. So again, we know we have a real acute hemolysis. I have quite marked polychromasia and a reticulocyte response. I have nucleated red blood cells. And so I'm looking for those nasty red cells. And what you might start to see, these cells here, and you might start to think that you have spherocytes. You look around, you'll find quite a few of them. But if you look really carefully, they are not perfectly round. They have this blister appearance to them. And this is where that Heinz body has been pitted out by the spleen and the membrane has rejoined. So we have almost an unequal hemoglobinization of these cells. They're no longer perfectly round, and you can almost see where they've been pulled and where that spleen has pitted out those bite and blister cells, pitted out those Heinz bodies and formed those bite and blister cells. So we may have an occasional one that's a real sort of spherocyte looking, but even here I can see that little blip up in the corner. Now look here, and I've got a blister cell. This one's sort of flat on one side where the other side has had its membrane disturbed. I can see that blip up there again on that cell. I can see these hemolyzed cells in the background. This one's not round, it's sort of got a little bite just down there taken out of it. This one we can see where the membrane's been pulled. We can see this one with the uneven hemoglobinization where the membrane has been disrupted as well and started to leak out its hemoglobin. So that is a slight difference, but sometimes people will get these confused on first glance. We're lucky with this program that we do have the ability to go down to almost 100 times or further. And so you should be able to give these spherocytes or bite and blister cells a really good look, because you'll see it is not perfectly round. And these are your bite and blister cells that you see in oxidative hemolysis. So hopefully that will guide you on how to approach cells where you think you have spherocytes, and sort of how to come to what is the most likely diagnosis to those slides when you see them, and how to be really careful that you're not reporting spherocytes, but what you actually have is bite and blister cells, because it's very, very different clinically. This is oxidative hemolysis. You need to remove that oxidizing agent. Usually it's got to do with the fava beans. It's very different to an autoimmune hemolytic anemia, where we're looking at a positive DAT and red cells coated in complement.